This has the potential to be Minnesota's Watergate. I stand by my allegations. I stand by my claims about the $100 million.
Stillman was the first to blow the whistle on what he and his colleagues were uncovering as early as 2015. And he says the political machine destroyed him.
If you don't sign it, we are going to destroy you.
Stillman left DHS and moved out of state.
Welcome back to the Hannibal is Hungry channel, and we are back talking about the Minnesota Somali fraud situation. We're talking about a man who blew the whistle on the biggest fraud in United States history 10 years ago, and they destroyed him for it. Let's get into it.
This has the potential to be Minnesota's Watergate. I stand by my allegations. I stand by my claims about the $100 million. It could potentially be higher than that.
Scott Stillman was a digital forensics supervisor for the Minnesota Department of Human Services from 2007 to 2017. In 2018, he sounded the alarm in front of the Minnesota Senate and the Minnesota House.
And believe me, Minnesota's government programs are being victimized by organized crime because of lack of controls.
So shout out to News Nation that had this interview with a man by the name of Scott Stillman. He was a digital forensics supervisor at the DHS for a decade. So this wasn't a random person on the internet. He wasn't a blogger. He wasn't a YouTuber. A state employee whose entire job was to investigate fraud. And he is sitting there in 2018 telling the Minnesota Senate and the Minnesota House, your programs are getting robbed. $100 million. That was his estimate 10 years ago. Now, here's why that number matters, because 100 million, that turned out to be conservative as we know more was going on. And we'll get to that in a second. But think about what that means. He had the data, he had the receipts, he ran the numbers, and the people that were supposed to act on it, the people that were supposed to protect the taxpayers, they heard him say $100 million and did nothing. Tim Walz became mayor in January 2019. That is 1 year after Stillman's testimony was on public record. So the question isn't whether Walz knew. The question is, what did he do about it? And obviously we already know the answer.
Stillman was the first to blow the whistle on what he and his colleagues were uncovering as early as 2015. Fake daycares defrauding Medicaid for millions.
Every time I did a search warrant, every single time we went through the door during business hours, there were never children in there, ever. It was set up with tables and chairs and toys, but they appeared disused, dusted.
These daycares, is it fair to say that they were run by members of the Somali community here?
Every daycare I investigated was run by Somalis, owned by Somalis. This was fraud and other issues on a scale I had never, ever encountered before. And you see them billing Monday through Monday, holidays, weekends, sometimes 12, even 24-hour billings. And you see no children coming and going. And you're realizing, okay, you look at the logs and they're billing for 100 kids a day.
Nick Shirley was not the first one to discover this. Every single time they kicked in the door during the business hours, no kids. Not sometimes, not most of the time, every single time. Dusty toys, dusty tables. Nobody has been in this building, but the billing says 100 kids a day. Monday through Monday, holidays, weekends, 24-hour days. You're billing kids on Christmas, on New Year's at 3 a.m.? Come on now. And obviously it wasn't just one daycare. This is organized. These aren't mistakes on a spreadsheet. This is a criminal enterprise billing the government for children who don't exist in buildings where no one shows up. And Stillman was documenting all of this. His team was executing search warrants. They had the evidence. They had the billing records. They had the bank statements. And this is happening under the noses of state officials who are either too scared to act or too connected to care. The House Oversight Committee confirmed that the DHS leadership put compassion over compliance. That is a direct quote from one of their own employees. This is not compassion. This is a cover-up. This is a robbery of taxpayer money.
And in one case, or in cases, they identified money going from their bank accounts to prominent politicians in Minnesota.
And then what? What happens?
We started seeing a lot of our cases, we would present them for prosecution, and we were presented with roadblocks. You don't have enough evidence. This isn't really a crime. questions of, they thought, issues of race.
Did you catch that? He's tracing the money from these fake daycares, these operations billing for ghost children, a bunch of Caspers. And where does that money go? To prominent politicians in Minnesota. That's not me saying it. That's the forensic investigator who ran the numbers. So now you understand why these roadblocks came. You don't have enough evidence? Of course he did. Oh, this isn't really a crime? Billing for 100 kids who don't exist is absolutely a crime. It's fraud. And then the big one, questions of race. They played the race card to shut down a fraud investigation. They use identity politics as a shield for organized crime. Minnesota taxpayers, this is where your money went. And this is where the Tim Walz timeline gets even more bizarre and more ugly, because the House Oversight Committee, this is Congress, not me, found that Walz didn't launch an inspector general inquiry until 2023. 2023. That's 5 years after Stillman testified. DHS employees, 480 of them, went on social media. They went public on social media accusing Walz of retaliating against whistleblowers, monitoring, threats. They said leadership told them to be quiet because they didn't want to appear to discriminate. So the fraud kept running, the money kept flowing, and the people who spoke up got punished.
He wrote 2 emails to his superiors at DHS.
And I felt I had a responsibility, a moral responsibility. I also had a legal obligation. I wrote 2 emails, detailed emails to my supervisor, recording my concerns, giving them statistics, dates, times, dollar amounts, things of that nature.
If the general public knew the gravity of what we are seeing, it would have a negative impact on DHS, its leaders, and state government. We need to have an outside, independent entity conduct an audit of DHS's handling of the hundreds of millions of dollars being misspent, despite repeated warnings to senior management that state money is being used to fund terrorism. Then, he says, the political machine destroyed him. They forced him to sign a plea agreement in an unrelated lawsuit stating he had made false statements, which Stillman says was used to damage his credibility.
The the Attorney General's office, the Minnesota Attorney General's office, and Department of Human Services came to me and said, something has developed and we are now going to require you to sign a plea agreement. We know you didn't do this, but we really don't care. If you don't sign it, we are going to destroy you.
Stillman left DHS and moved out of state.
Now this is bizarre. I mean, play that back one more time in your head. We know you didn't do this. We really don't care. If you don't sign it, we're going to destroy you, end quote. That is not law enforcement. That is a threat. That is the state of Minnesota, the Attorney General's office, the Auditor General, the DHS, telling a whistleblower, shut up or we're going to end your career. And they made him sign a plea deal on an unrelated case, admitting to false statements he said he never made to destroy his credibility. I would like to know exactly what the details of that situation, but some of this stuff lines up because when he testifies about this fraud, they could point out to the plea deal and say, you know what, this guy is not reliable. That's how the machine works. You don't have to disprove the evidence. You just have to discredit the messenger. And it worked. Stillman left the DHS, left the state entirely, 8 years of exile. And during those 8 years, the fraud didn't stop. It didn't slow down. It just scaled from $100 million to $9 billion potentially. All because the people in power decided it was easier to destroy one honest man than to actually do their jobs.
8 years later, Stillman was proven right. In December 2025, U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson estimated the fraud at $9 billion.
What we see in Minnesota is not a handful of bad actors committing crimes. It's a staggering industrial scale fraud.
He exonerated me in the fact that everything I had said during my Senate and House hearings was not only accurate, 100% accurate, but it was incredibly conservative. I think this is the biggest fraud in the United States history. It's a threat against our country, and most people are totally unaware that it's even happening.
Now we're at $9 billion. The U.S. attorney himself put that number on the record, not 100 million, which is what Stillman estimated back in 2018 when they called him a liar. Now we're at $9 billion. That is the largest theft of taxpayer money in American history. Children's nutrition programs, autism services, Medicaid, housing, programs for the most vulnerable people in Minnesota. It was gutted by organized fraud while the governor and attorney general sat on their hands. nonsense. Like he said, most people were totally unaware that it even happened. This should be the biggest story in the country. Whistleblower warned him, then they destroyed him. The fraud scaled to $9 billion, some of the money that was traced to terrorist networks overseas. And what is the governor's response? He waited until Nick Shirley and the feds exposed him, and then all of a sudden he announced a task force. That's not a leadership. That's not leadership. That's damage control. Tim Walz had the receipts literally since before he took office. Scott Stillman handed them the whole case on a silver platter, and they still chose to cover it up every single time. That's the story. Scott Stillman blew the whistle in 2015, testified in 2018, got destroyed by the state, left Minnesota, and 8 years later, the feds confirmed that he was right about everything, except the number that was probably 90 times worse than he had estimated. That's a system that worked exactly how it was designed, to protect the people at the top and silence anyone who threatened the money. It's great that Scott Stillman finally is getting his vindication, but he lost 10 years dealing with the nonsense, and that's why Tim Walz's political career is over. Once this scandal came out, he knew there was no way he would ever serve anyone ever again. Tim Walz still needs to face accountability for what he did. But let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. Thank you for taking time to watch this video. And if you got to this point, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. This is where we're going to continue to follow this story and many others on this channel. Thank you for taking time to watch this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video.